goodness, good morning, good morning, good morning. What I know about 2nd B is that even if the preaching's no good, the music was worth the price of admission, right? We should be just offering the benediction now, but anyway, I'm so grateful, so glad to get to see you, and what an exciting new chapter is about to begin. It's about time, right? You're on the front of your seat, right? Thrilled to be with you in this kind of moment. And for some of you that have not met before, hello, my name's Alan. But for many of you, good to see all of you again. I have a question for you. Anybody this morning tired? Can I have a witness? Is anybody maybe last night you saw every hour on the clock, and that's typical for you, right? Is there anybody just weary? The CDC says that 58% of people in America are terribly sleep deprived. We're not getting enough sleep, which is the reason you keep falling asleep in church, right? My dad always had trouble falling asleep in church. I remember sitting next to him as a tot, and my dad had this practice of, he was kind of short, so he had room to do it. He would just hold his legs totally out like a bad yoga pose and hold them out the entire sermon, and he was so uncomfortable, he would stay awake. So I would commend that to you over the next several minutes, because that really does, and it's good for your abs too. Anyway, it's sometimes what we really just want, like a preschooler, a mom with preschoolers, we just want a nap, right? Some of us are just so tired. And physical tired is one thing. But I'm really not talking about the tired at midnight. I'm talking about the tired that you have at 7 in the morning and you wake up and you're still tired. It's the tired in the middle of the afternoon. It's a tired day after day after day. It's the emotional tired. It's driving behind someone who's going slow in the left lane. Really? Right? It's tired of having all the house guests who the kids keep coming back and staying. Really? Maybe it's tired of taking care of mama, and where are my siblings? Maybe it's tired of my church volunteer work. I know we're not supposed to be tired about that kind of thing, but it's just us family right here. Can we admit sometimes people just get tired, right? Sometimes we're just sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? Sometimes we're tired of trying to smooth over or hide over the dysfunction and toxicity in my family and try to make it look like that we're the Facebook version of ourselves. And that is so wearying. I'm so tired of explaining away my prodigal child who's not accomplishing when I wish I could say he or she was. I'm tired of covering up for his or her alcoholism. Some things just wear us out. I'm tired of watching the news and being angry all the time. Anybody tired of that? Right? Anybody here tired? You know what I mean. And if that's you, then boy, do we have a word for you. Jesus says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." My goodness, does Jesus know what we need, right? I will give you rest. And sometimes the rest we need won't be corrected by a nap, right? It won't be corrected by a sabbatical. It won't be corrected by a day off or a week off or a vacation. Sometimes the rest we need is so much deeper than that. Jesus says, if you're really weary, if you're really tired, whatever kind of tired, come to me, and I'll give you rest. And I'm sure that when Jesus said those words for the first time, the people who heard it somewhat like we do. I mean, they worked harder than we do. And they probably were thinking, I am physically tired. I would love to have a break, Jesus. But I think they also were emotionally wearied. They were occupied by the Roman army at the time. They were sick and tired of that. You could believe that. Things weren't going as they wanted them to go, and it seemed to never, ever end. They were tired of all of that. So they were tired emotionally. They were tired physically. I have a hunch there's even more than that. They might have well been tired spiritually as well. The context in Matthew chapter 11, if you were to flip back a little couple of pages, Jesus has just been preaching in Capernaum, which was kind of his home base in Galilee, and the cities there, Chorazin and Bethsaida and Capernaum, where he did most of his work. He poured himself into that. He spent all of his time there. He did all kinds of miracles, all kinds of teaching there, the majority of it. And you know what happened as a result of all that? Almost nothing. He picked up a few apostles along the way. Okay, that's pretty good. But the point is, not that many people responded. And he was frustrated with them. And what he says to them is, woe to you, cities, if the things that have been done for you and in your sight and in your ears had been done to Sodom and Gomorrah in the Old Testament, they would have repented with sackcloth and ashes. And you just sit there kind of bored. And he has fire in his eyes and in his voice, and he says, woe to you. Have you ever tried as a teacher to teach someone who thinks they already know it all? Teachers, you know what I'm talking about, right? Have you ever tried to feed someone who comes to the table and they're already completely full, especially with junk food, right? It's so hard. Jesus is trying to teach to people who don't think they need to learn anything. He's trying to offer the way for people who think they know the way. He's trying to offer answers for people who have all the answers. They're well-heeled and they've got it figured out. They know the rules. Now, the rules are hard to keep, but they know the rules. And so they were hard soil. And so he said, with a tenderness then, he said, Lord, thank you that you hid this from the wise and you've given it instead to the babes. I'm not talking about co-eds at Tech, meaning babies. And then he turns to them and says, so if you're a babe, if you don't have it figured out, if you'll admit you're tired, if you'll admit that you have doubts, if you'll admit that sometimes you don't have it all put together, if you'd be willing to still learn and grow, do I have a word and an invitation for you, Jesus says. So come to me. Come to me if you really were weary, if you really are restless for the real rest you're looking for. I've got it. You remember St. Augustine, 5th century church father, named after a Florida town, but he said that our hearts, our spirits are restless until they find their rest in thee, right? There's this spiritual shape to us, the way our Creator made us, that can only be filled if we have a relationship with the Creator, God's self. And if you're trying to fill it in with anything else, you're trying to feed your hunger with junk food. Our hearts are restless. What's the rest we're looking for? Yes, we need physical rest, we need emotional rest, but we also need spiritual rest. And until we find that, we'll never really be at rest. Come to me, Jesus says, and I will give you rest. Now, you'll see that phrase, Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. You'll see that phrase on fronts of pulpits, especially I see it in airport chapels. People who are having jet lag and they've been probed by TSA, they just want to come and they love to see something. Come to me, all of you who are weary, I'll give you rest. You see it in hospital chapels. They're coming in with the IV post, and they've been probed also, and they just need a break. You'll see it sometimes over cemeteries. I guess you can rest in peace there for sure. But the point is, sometimes I see it in pulpits in churches, and you see it up in stained glass windows, and you see it engraved on all kinds of coffee cups and everything else in Christian bookstores. Come to me, all of you who are weary, and I will give you rest. We love this part of the story because we're tired, and we love to think that Jesus will give us rest. It's like it's a little lap we can crawl up into, and he's a pillow, and what a great picture of Jesus is that. Except there's that next verse, which is never inscribed on anybody's pillows. It's never sold on anybody's coffee cup. But right after that, he says, come to me, I'll give you rest. Oh, good. Take my yoke. Take my yoke upon you, for I am humble and merciful in heart, and the yoke is easy and light, and you'll find rest for your soul. Time out, Jesus. When I need a break, I'm looking for a hammock, right? I want a spa day. I want a sabbatical. I want a pillow. I do not want a yoke. Does anybody have any idea what a yoke is? All right, you're not too far from the farm, right? I grew up in the country. We were sophisticated. We actually had a tractor, so we were very kind of classy. But the point is, there was a time when farm work was done mainly with a yoke. And of course, it's a big beam, and sometimes it's a single yoke. In fact, sometimes you can even put it on a person, like a bar across the back, and it sits heavy on the shoulders. But you put a pail of water on both sides, and you can carry so much more than you could have otherwise. A yoke is actually a pretty cool invention for doing more work than you thought you probably could have. But the typical yoke was a two-hoop kind of yoke that animals were attached to. Now, quite frankly, sometimes prisoners, especially in the ancient world, actually had that yoke put around them as a kind of sign of servitude, and they were led out of the city like animals, But usually it was animals, and the most popular, most effective animal to work in the yoke was an ox. Stronger than a cow, stronger than a horse, than an ox, because an ox is as strong as an ox, right. It's exactly that strong. And so an ox is about a 2,000-pound animal, and it can pull with a yoke 2,000 pounds. It can actually pull its entire weight. But here's the cool thing. Because it was often a double yoke, if you put another ox or oxen or oxi, whatever the plural is, if you put two of them together, now you'd think if one ox could carry 2,000 pounds, you remember your math? What would two oxi be able to carry? 4,000, right? But no, if you put two oxen, if you put two of them together, they carry not 4,000 pounds, they can carry 12,000 pounds. 3 times the cumulative weight that they would normally think of individually. The point is, a yoke is the best thing invented since the wheel. It's amazing what can happen, far more than the math would imagine. A yoke was a tremendous way of getting farm work done. In fact, the word acre comes from an old French word which meant the amount of land that a team of oxen could plow in one day. That was considered an acre. And so it was a great way of doing work. Now, in the Bible, the word yoke is mentioned 50 times. 48 of those 50 times, it's used negatively. In other words, you don't want a yoke. So Paul will say to the Galatians in Galatians 6:1, who bewitched you? Why did you put on again the yoke of the law and circumcision? Or St. Peter will preach to the church in Jerusalem in Acts 15, and he says, as the Gentiles are coming into the church, let's not burden them with the yoke of all the requirements of the law. In the Old Testament, they talked about the yoke of Pharaoh, the reminder of the burden of the slavery that they had. The prophets in the Old Testament will talk about breaking the yoke of oppression and the yoke of sin. No one wanted a yoke, apparently, with one exception. Right here in this text, Jesus uses a yoke in a positive sense. Take my yoke upon you. Again, we're still shocked that he's offering tired people an implement of work, but take my yoke upon you, because my yoke is easy. The word's really probably shouldn't be easy. It's exactly well fitted. It fits your shoulders exactly. Do you know what kind of craftsman created and molded and shaped yokes in the first century? Anybody's legs still straight out? This is your part. Carpenters. Like Joseph of Nazareth and that kid that grew up that he mentored in his shop. Take my yoke. Jesus knew what he was talking about. Perfectly matched for you. Because my yoke is perfectly matched, and therefore the work is light and can be done. Take my yoke upon you. By the way, the other positive use of yoke is in Philippians chapter 4. I think you could argue Paul had a favorite church. It's the church at Philippi. Full of joy, you remember that? I have a favorite church. It's you. I'll just admit it. And I'm not just saying it to you. I say it to everybody else. They say, well, who's second B? But the point is, I was telling Stephanie before, I think I may have preached more sermons at this church than any other church I ever pastored. My goodness, over the years. But you are, I never quite take all of my heart away from here. You're my favorite church. You are. I wear your tears on my shoulder, and I dance your joy with you also. You're my favorite. Well, Paul had a favorite church, the church of Philippi. Now, for all of the great things in that letter, in Philippians chapter 4, he does say, now I have a word for these. There were 2 women leaders, could be pastors. You're not the first church that had women pastors. Philippi did too. So these 2 women who are key leaders in the church, to Euodia and Syntyche, he says, I appeal to you two, get along and figure out how to work better together. Now, by the way, the letter was read aloud in the church in worship, so you can see Yodi and Syntyche just kind of diving into their purses at that point. But the point is, in the first century, in the New Testament church, sometimes key church leaders disagreed, didn't get along with each other, and it caused trouble in the church. That doesn't happen anymore, but it used to happen. It used to happen in the first century. Fortunately, that doesn't, anyway, even in your best church, it can happen. And said, Paul says to them, you two who do such great work, if you don't figure out how to gee and haw together, you're not going to get to the end of the row. And then he appeals to someone unnamed, but he says, and I appeal to you, my true yoke fellow. Would you help those two figure that out and get themselves back in the yoke together? Now, who is that yoke fellow? We don't know. Could have been Epaphroditus, somebody else. So the point is, in every church Paul established, he always had some yoke fellow, somebody who stayed behind, that he viewed himself as being in partnership with him. Well, think of Paul being this solo player. He wasn't. It was always Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Silas, Paul and Timothy, Paul and this guy or this gal. The Christian life was never meant to be done alone. In the 1950s and 60s, there was a Quaker theologian and pastor named Elton Trueblood who took this image and he created what he called the Yoke Fellow Institute. Some of you may have heard about this. And the idea was to help encourage people to figure out, especially doing Christian work, how to link together in community, at least one partner, if not more, to do a good work. If you figure out how to do that with others, you're much more likely not only to finish the work, but to do it with joy. If you try to do it on your own, you will become weary in well-doing. And you'll grind a poison into the bread while you're trying to make it. Figure out how to be yoked together. That's the other positive use. Anyway, back to Jesus. Take my yoke upon you. You know, he called disciples one at a time, but he sent them out in pairs to do the work. Is your work caring for a family member? Or is your work of volunteerism and service within the church or within the community? Is whatever it is that you're doing, are you doing it on your own? Have you figured out how to get somebody with you? Have you figured out how to share the work? In Ecclesiastes, they got this idea way before I did, but it says two are better than one. Because if one falls, the other one is there to help pick them up. But woe to the person who, if they fell, didn't have anybody there to pick them up. Well, yeah, duh. But the point is, that's the thing. Be yoked together. And try to do that with someone that you share a lot of values with. Paul would say in 2 Corinthians 6, he says, he talked about marriage too, but he says, don't be unequally yoked, right? Meaning not only in a marriage, by the way, have you ever been in a business partnership with someone who didn't share your values? If you're yoked with anybody who's not equally yoked with you, you can't accomplish anything for very long. So it's not just marriage, any relationship. So it says be equally yoked, which, by the way, makes me think, I think I've been interpreting Jesus' yoke passage wrong most of my life. I was thinking about this week. I always imagined, did you? I always imagined when Jesus said, take my yoke upon you, I always imagined Jesus was in the other hoop, right? And I'm there with him, and Jesus is pulling with me, which is pretty comforting. It's kind of like we're both carrying a sofa, but I know he can handle the heavier end. You know, it's just like, you know, it's not too hard if I know he's on the other side there. It's like lifting weights with Arnold Schwarzenegger. But I'm not very equally yoked with Jesus. How about you? I wonder if what Jesus is not the other person in the yoke. Jesus might be the farmer with the yoke, addressing us and somebody else he's trying to connect us to. Hey, y'all, take my yoke upon you. Because the work was never meant to be done alone. Aren't you glad Carrie is coming? When she gets here next week, you won't have to do any more work. Right? You'll have paid help, and you can just sit back and enjoy the show, right? Not, right? In one of the great legacies of this church has been the yoked partnership, not only among the clergy, but between the clergy and the laity. That is still obviously deeply and richly true. That's the only way the work can be done. Otherwise, not only will it not be done, it will not be done with joy, and it will not be done to God's glory. Take my yoke upon you, y'all. Figure out the way to do the work together, and if you do, it's amazing how much more you will be able to do. And you will get the plow to the end of the row and look back and think, that really was light after all. There's just some things that weren't meant to be done alone. Have you ever tried to ride a seesaw by yourself? Or sing a duet? Or play tennis? Right? Or play tug of war? Or for that matter, make up a bed, all those throw pillows and all that stuff. Anyway, but there's just some things that can, two to tango, right? There's just some things can only be done with pairs or more, and that's actually among them. Let me give you another one. It's Christian work and the Christian life. If you'll take that yoke, if you'll take that spirit upon you, even if you just are worn out this morning, you'll find your knees strengthened and your lungs filled and your joy and your hope filled, and you'll realize it was never meant to be done alone. You were never, ever meant to walk alone. In 1945, early in the year, with the entire world still weary of war, talking about weary, Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote a musical for Broadway. It was set in the Great Depression, but the music was called Carousel. Some of you are familiar with it? And the story plot line set in the Great Depression was a guy desperate, trying to figure out, he ends up robbing a bank, trying to survive, and he gets killed in the process of that bank robbery. Tragic in so many ways. His wife rushes to his side, and he dies in her arms, in her lap. She's totally distraught. Her whole life feels like it is over. And her cousin comes up to her in the play, sits down beside her in that anguish, and sings the signature song to her of that musical. When you walk through the storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm, there's a golden sky and the sweet silver song of the lark. So walk on through the wind. Walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. The Beatles, before they started making their own music, did a cover of that Carousel song in the 1960s in Liverpool, back when they were just still playing in Liverpool. Anyway, and it was popular in Liverpool, and the Liverpool football team, which we would call soccer, the football team of Liverpool was losing again, and the song was kind of popular at the time, and the crowd just spontaneously, because the Beatles were singing it, I guess, the crowd began singing "You'll Never Walk Alone." Just linked arm in arm, and kind of like a Red Sox game with Sweet Caroline, and then they just began to all sing it. Well, lo and behold, the Liverpool team looked back and thought, well, we're not alone in this, and somehow they're part of it too, even though we're on the field, they're there, but we're doing this together, and sure enough, they won the game. Well, guess what? That became the song for the Liverpool football team, and if you go to their stadium now, there's a big iron arch over the front door that says, "You never walk alone." They sing it in every single game. It is amazing what can be accomplished if you yoke together, because it'll remind you always, you never walk, you never work, you never live, you never even die alone. Isn't that good news? Let's pray. Oh Lord, maybe somebody here just needs a nap. Somebody here may be really just worn out trying to keep their frazzled parts of life together, but maybe all of us sometimes just feel just kind of spiritually spent too. Whatever it is, help us hear you calling us to you tenderly. But you haven't just called us for a sabbatical. You've called us to work differently. That's actually what we most need. So as a new season begins in front of us, help us to kind of put our shoulder back together. Maybe even look more urgently for who can share the yoke with us. And with enormous joy, set our eyes on the horizon at the end of the road, knowing that knowing that we can do this together by the only way you've given us to do it, which is together. Thank you, O Lord, for calling us into that kind of community and for the joy that makes that kind of work light. We pray this in the name of Jesus, the teller of the story, the giver of the yoke, and the one standing at the end of the row. Amen.